we gave the being recorded. There we go. All right. We gave the 5 minute extra time for people to log on, so we're going to get started. My name is Mary Crawford. I am one of the co-chairs of Go Green Galloway, which is a local task force from our township looking to educate our residents on how to be in one with the environment. And try to do the best we can in that regard. I'd like to thank our co-sponsors of the event here today, Native Plant Society of New Jersey, specifically the Southeast chapter, the South Jersey Butterfly Project, and the Evesham Green Team. In particular, I want to thank Go Green Galloway member Elizabeth Egan, who saw that Doug was available to do these webinars and brought it to our attention, and we signed him up real quick. Mike Jacob from the National Plant Society of New Jersey for doing the Zoom and setting that all up for us. Took a lot of pressure off for us on the tech side of things. We also want to thank our promotional supporters, people who spread the word. CU Morris River, Margate Green Team, Stockton University, Surfrider, Sustainable New Jersey, including the Atlantic Cape May Hub, from spreading the word around. So thank you. We are so pleased to have Doug Tallamy on tonight. He is a professor in the Department of Entomology and Wildlife Ecology at the University of Delaware. He has authored 103 research publications and has taught insect-related courses for 40 years. Chief among his research goals is to better understand the many ways insects interact with plants and how such interactions determine the diversity of animal communities. His book, Bringing Nature Home, How Native Plants Sustain Wildlife in Our Gardens, was published in Timber Press in 2007 and awarded the 2008 Silver Medal by the Garden Writers Association. The Living Landscape, co-authored with Rick Dark, was published in 2014. And Doug's new book, Nature's Best Hope, also released by Timber Press this year in February of 2020. It's a New York Times bestseller. Among his awards are the Gardening Club of America Margaret Douglas Medal for Conservation and the Tom Dodd Jr. Award of Excellence, the 2018 AHS B.Y. Morrison Communication Award, and the 2019 Cynthia Westcott Scientific Writing Award. So I am just going to pass it right to Doug, because that's who you're here to see and hear. Thanks for coming out tonight. And Doug, the floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Mary. Feel free to click off my video because I don't want you to see me. I want you to look at the screen. All right, before I tell you what my ideas of nature's best hope are, I wanted to go back to what happened last fall. Not this fall, but last fall we had what is called an oak mast, all the way from Massachusetts down at least to Georgia. And west of the Mississippi, all the red oaks got together and decided they'd make their acorns at the same time. And this is what it looked like in a lot of places. Well, I am easily entertained. So I took one of those acorns and I just stared at it. And I was rewarded because an insect started to chew its way out of the acorn. It didn't take long. It makes a little hole and then tries to squeeze its way through. Kind of looks like the Pillsbury Doughboy. Finally plops down. Very dangerous time for this insect larva because it's a really good meal and a lot of things want to eat it. So it's got to get below ground to safety, and it does that again quickly. About 30 seconds, it goes down where it stretches in all directions and forms a chamber, and then converts itself to a pupa, and it stays there for 2 years. After 2 years, comes out as an acorn weevil. This is what a typical weevil looks like. It looks like they have a very long nose, but in fact, that's an extension of the head capsule. And the mouth parts are way down here. And they take those mouth parts, chew a hole down into the center of the acorn, lay an egg up there at the top of the hole, and the larva hatches and crawls down. That's how it gets into the center of the acorn. You might wonder why they spend 2 years underground. It's because red oak acorns take 18 months to develop. So if they came out the very next year, there wouldn't be enough acorns for them. Well, that, of course, leaves a hole in the acorn, a true vacuum. You all know that nature abhors a vacuum. And in this case, they have filled it with 3 species of Temnothorax ants. And Vicki, by the way, I got these ants from Steve. He flew them down to me. It was a great effort on his part. So these ants have discovered the hole in the acorn. What they want to do is move their colony in because their old acorn is falling apart. So when they find a hole, they get very excited and they recruit everybody in the colony and start to carry their young and their eggs. It's a frantic time. It only takes about 30 minutes, but they move the entire colony into their new acorn. Then they post a guard up there at the top and make sure nobody else comes in. And they will stay in this acorn for the next 2 years until it falls apart. Well, about this time, my wife Cindy says, what is your point? What are you trying to tell us? My point is that's just one of millions of very specialized interactions that comprise nature. This is another one, the relationship between jays and oaks, particularly acorns. Jays are the primary dispersers of oak acorns. They'll fly up to 2 miles away, tap that acorn beneath the surface of the soil. The object, of course, is that they will get it during the winter and have something to eat. But they don't have a great memory, and they only remember about a quarter of what they bury is. And it turns out that each jay is planting about 3,000 oak trees every single year. So that's the primary way oaks get around. You're not going to have pileated woodpeckers unless you have lots of carpenter ants, because that's what they feed their young. And you're not going to have carpenter ants unless you have the big trees that make those carpenter ants. You won't have this bee, Andrena facilii, unless you have Facilia. That's the only plant, the only pollen that bee can rear its young on. As a matter of fact, out of the 4,000 species of native bees we have, over a third of them are highly specialized and can only use the pollen of particular plant genera. So for example, there are at least 13 species of bees that can only use the pollen of our perennial sunflowers. You won't have Baltimore checker spots unless you have white turtlehead, and on and on and on. Nature really is a series of very specialized relationships. But today, these relationships, nature itself, is on the ropes. And it's on the ropes because we did not take Teddy Roosevelt's advice. Way back in 1908, Teddy heard the state of Arizona was going to mine the Grand Canyon. So he went to the canyon, he looked out over the edge, and he said, leave it as it is. And with those 5 words, he started the creation of the Grand Canyon National Park. The problem, of course, is that it's no longer an option to leave most of the US as it was. We've already changed it. There's only about 5% of the lower 48 states that's anything close to its original pristine condition. And that's because we've logged the country repeatedly, we've tilled it, we've drained it, we've grazed it. We've got 770 million acres of rangeland in the US, which is 4.5 times the size of Texas. And of course, we've paved it or otherwise developed it. We have straightened our rivers and dammed them, and you can spell that any way you want. We've polluted our skies and changed our climate for centuries to come. We have drained our aquifers and introduced more than 3,300 species of plants from other continents, many of which are now running amok in our natural areas. So in short, we have carved up the natural world into tiny remnants of its former self. And each one of those remnants is too small and too isolated from other remnants to sustain the species that run the ecosystems that we all depend on. Why have we done all this? Well, we thought our nest, planet Earth, was so big that we could foul it forever and there wouldn't be any consequences. But we were wrong, and that's why we're seeing headlines like this. The insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Talking about global insect decline. Followed by this headline, and North America has lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years. That's a third of the North American bird population. And the UN now says that it's very possible we're going to lose 1 million species to extinction within the next 20 years. And I love how they report these headlines as if it's just another headline. They might as well say we're going to lose oxygen in the next 20 years and then go on to the next story. This is not an option, folks. This is simply not an option. We have to make sure that doesn't happen. Well, I could go on about the pox that we humans have delivered upon the environment, thus upon all of our houses, but that's not what this talk is about. This talk is about a cure for that pox. It's a cure that'll take small efforts from lots of people, but those efforts will deliver enormous physical, psychological, and environmental benefits to everybody. Let's return briefly to this headline, the insect apocalypse is here. What does it mean for the rest of life on Earth? Well, very famous, Edward O. Wilson, E.O. Wilson from Harvard, told us what it would mean if we were to lose insects on planet Earth. And he did it way back in 1987 with this paper, The Little Things That Run the World. His message was very simple. Life as we know it depends on insects. And if they were to disappear, so would most of our flowering plants. And if most of our flowering plants disappeared, that would not only change the physical structure of terrestrial habitats, but it would essentially end most of the energy flow through those habitats. In other words, the food webs that support our animals, our amphibians, our reptiles, our birds, and our mammals would collapse, and they would all disappear. The biosphere, the living portion of the earth, would rot because we'd lose insect decomposers that rapidly turn over nutrients. All we would have is bacteria and fungi. And of course, humanity wouldn't survive any of those drastic changes. The good news is that that doesn't have to happen. We can save our insects, we can save our birds, we can save nature itself, but we're going to have to change the way we landscape in order to do that. Why is that? Well, remember, humans are products of nature. We are totally dependent on what we call ecosystem services, the products of healthy natural systems. Here are just some of the things that plants give us, like oxygen, pretty important, clean water, equally important. Plants also slow water's journey to the sea where it's too salty to use. Carbon capture, really important these days. Plants are pulling carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, building their own tissues out of it, but then even more important, they pump the extra carbon into the ground. Our soils are brown or black because of the carbon that plant roots have deposited there over the eons. Plants also build topsoil, hold it in place, they prevent floods, dampen severe weather, and many other things. What do animals do for plants? Well, they provide pest control services. They pollinate nearly 90% of our flowering plants. They disperse plant seeds, and again, other things. So designing landscapes like this that do not produce ecosystem services is simply no longer an option. It never was a good option. But today, with 7.8, 7.9 billion people on the planet, we need more ecosystem services now than ever before. There were visionaries through the ages who recognized that humans needed to work on their relationship with planet Earth, and Aldo Leopold is one of the most eloquent. He wrote extensively in the first half of the 1900s. One of the things he said is that the oldest task in human history is to live on a piece of land without spoiling it. Now, many indigenous groups have been good at doing that, but our expansive Western cultures and the great Asian societies have been terrible at doing that. We tend to take way more than the earth has to offer at one place. In other words, we spoil it, then we move to another place and spoil it, and we keep moving. And Aldo realized that there are not enough places left that are unspoiled. So he had a dream that we would actually develop a land ethic. He knew we needed to use the earth. We needed to farm it and lumber it and graze and mine and do all of those things. But he dreamt that we would learn how to do it gently, that we could actually use planet Earth without destroying local ecosystems. And he called that the land ethic. Wrote about it in his very famous Sand County Almanac. What he never talked about was developing a land ethic where we actually lived. And I'm not sure why he didn't, but I suspect that the notion that humans and nature cannot coexist in the same place at the same time was so deeply embedded in the culture of Aldo Leopold's day, it's still embedded in our own culture, that he may not have even recognized it as an option. What I want to argue tonight, though, is that living with nature is an option. Not only is it an option, it's the only viable option that's left to us. You know, in the past, conservationists worked almost exclusively where there weren't a lot of people. We need to flip that on its head. We now need to not just save nature, but put it back where there are a lot of people, because that's pretty much every place. In other words, we have to find ways for nature to thrive in human-dominated landscapes. Where are we going to do that? Well, let's return to private property. We can't ignore it because most of the U.S. is privately owned. 85.6% of the U.S. east of the Mississippi is privately owned. If we ignored private holdings, we would fail because we'd only be working on 15% of the land, and that is not nearly enough to preserve the ecosystems that we need. But there are also lots of areas we never consider as options for conservation. Here are just some of them. How about power and pipeline rights of ways? 21 million acres and those types of lands. Railroad rights of ways, another 3 million acres. Roadsides, another 17 million acres. Golf courses, 2 million acres. Airports, 3 million acres. You know, the Denver airport is twice the size of Manhattan. These are large areas. Then we have all the places where we live. Rural areas, suburbia, our city centers. Hundreds of millions of acres there. If you take just these places and add them up, that's 599 million acres. How big is 599 million acres? Well, it's bigger than Vermont, plus New Jersey, plus Maine, Virginia, New York, Georgia, Florida, Oklahoma, Montana, California. Throw Texas in there too. Not having a place to do conservation is not the issue. We can do it almost anywhere. Now, when I use the word conservation, I'm really misusing it, because that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about going to a pristine area and conserving it. I'm talking about rebuilding nature where we've already torn it apart. So restoration is a more appropriate word, but true restoration ecologists would say, well, you're not going to put it back exactly the way it was. And they're right. We're not going to. We've changed too many things, but we can reunite the players in specialized relationships to the point where we've rebuilt ecosystem function. It may not be exactly the same type of system that was there before we humans came along. It may not be exactly the same players, but it still will be a functioning ecosystem that produces services. In order to do that, we have to start with the species that contribute the most to ecosystem function. Not all species do. So we'll just call them the building blocks. There are lots of species that depend on the presence of other species. So we have to start with those building blocks. And one of the first things we need to do is create a food web. Remember, plants are capturing the energy from the sun and turning it into food. Then that food is what supports all the rest of the animals on the planet. But most animals do not eat plants directly. They eat something that ate plants, and that something is typically insects. And it turns out that caterpillars transfer more energy from plants to other animals than any other type of plant eater, any other insect or any other mammal. So if we took caterpillars out of the system, most of the energy would remain locked up in plants, and you'd have a failed food web. Here's a quick example: Carolina chickadees. And now you have black-capped chickadees up there in Jersey, but they're doing the same thing. We see them in our feeders right now, eating seed. About half their diet in the wintertime is seed, the other half is insects. But when they're rearing young, their babies cannot eat seeds. So they switch entirely to insects. And if they're in a healthy environment, they will feed their young exclusively on caterpillars. And it turns out chickadees are not exceptions. Most of the terrestrial birds of the US are rearing their young on insects, about 96% of them rearing their young on insects, and most of those insects are caterpillars. How do I know that? Well, there's lots of lines of evidence that suggest that, but I had a recent PhD student, Ashley Kennedy, who did a citizen science project. She put out a call for bird photographers all over the country to take pictures of birds as they were bringing food to the nest. And they loved that assignment. They sent her thousands of pictures, and she was able to reconstruct the nestling diet of 20 common bird families in North America. The idea was she was going to identify what was in the beaks of the birds, and there are a lot of good photographers out there, so she was able to do that. The green bars are the percentage of the nestling diet that was caterpillars. And in 16 out of 20 of the bird families she looked at, caterpillars dominated the nestling diet. So again, imagine what would happen if we took caterpillars out of the system. 16 out of the 20 common bird families in North America would probably not be able to reproduce. So there's something special about caterpillars. Let's consider what it is. There's actually several things special about caterpillars, and some of them are pretty obvious, like they're soft. And that's important. Think of this guy as a little sausage. It's got a very thin wrapper. The thin wrapper is exoskeleton. It's undigestible. Birds don't want a lot of exoskeleton. So that's perfect. You don't have much of an inedible thing here, and it's covering lots of very good food, high in protein, high in fat. And because caterpillars are soft, you can stuff them down the throat of your offspring without fear of injuring it. If you've ever seen a bird feed its young, they're pretty rough. Their beak is like a plunger. They just stuff it down there. Caterpillars are also relatively large prey items. One medium-sized caterpillar is equal to the biomass of 200 aphids. And some of our birds do chase aphids around, but do you want to chase 200 aphids, or do you want to get one caterpillar? As I said, they're nutritious, high in fat, high in protein, low percentage of chitin compared to most other insects, particularly beetles. Beetles are not like little sausages. They're like little tanks. Most of the beetle is undigestible, and they have a lot of sharp edges. And it turns out that caterpillars are the best source of carotenoids for birds during the breeding season. Now, I mentioned carotenoids not because I love organic chemistry, but because I'm a vertebrate, and you're a vertebrate, and birds are vertebrates. And vertebrates require carotenoids in their diet, but they cannot make their own carotenoids. They have to get them from plants. And that's why my wife, Cindy, makes sure I eat my carrots to get my beta carotene, and my tomatoes to get my lycopene, my whatever that is to get my lutein. And she makes sure I eat all of those things because they stimulate my immune system. And I cannot think of a better time to have a very strong immune system. Carotenoids are antioxidants. They protect our DNA from oxidative damage. They improve color vision. When your mother said, eat your carrots, you will see better, she was right. She didn't know she was right, but it turns out she was right. They improve sperm vitality, improve sexual attractiveness. Now we're talking about male birds like this prothonotary warbler, who's bright yellow because he's had access to lots of luteins. He takes those luteins, makes pigments out of them, puts them in his feathers, and the brighter yellow he is, the more ladies he attracts. Where are birds getting their carotenoids? From the things they eat, but the things they eat do not have equal levels of carotenoids in them. These first two bars here are caterpillars. They have by far the most carotenoids compared to any other type of bird invertebrate food item. The third bar is orthopteroids, things like grasshoppers and crickets and katydids. Here are the adult caterpillars down here, the moths and the butterflies themselves. They have far fewer carotenoids because they're not eating green leaves. It's the caterpillars that eat the green leaves. That's where the carotenoids are. And here's the earthworm way over here. The early bird gets the worm, but he doesn't get any carotenoids when he gets the worm. Does carotenoid content influence how birds hunt for prey? Well, Ashley did another study where she put GoPro cameras on the roofs of bluebird houses, and those cameras took a picture once every second. The object was to get a picture of the bluebirds as they flew into the box carrying food for the babies. And it worked out really well. The birds often landed on the roof of the box. They posed, got their picture taken, and then they went into the box. And she had a lot of GoPro cameras, a lot of bluebird boxes, and she did it for 3 years. So she ended up with more than 1 million pictures she had to go through. But out of that 1 million pictures, she got 7,628 pictures good enough where she could identify, again, the prey item and see how often it was brought back to the nest, and then look at its carotenoid content. So it turns out that the caterpillars are brought back more than anything else, and they have the highest carotenoid content, followed by those orthopteroids, and then everybody else with low carotenoids are brought in rather infrequently. So all this suggests that for birds anyway, caterpillars are probably not optional parts of the diet. It's looking like they're essential parts of the diet. So let's just say birds need caterpillars. Okay. The next question is, how many caterpillars do they need? Is 1 or 2 enough? Well, let's ask that question for chickadees. We've got a lot of data for chickadees. How many chickadees does it take to make a clutch or how many caterpillars does it take to make a clutch of chickadees? 1 or 2 is not enough. It takes thousands, 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars to make one clutch. And that's just to get them to the point where they leave the nest. Once they leave the nest, the parents continue to feed them caterpillars for another 24 days, but they're flying all over the place and nobody can count them. So you're talking about many, many thousands of caterpillars to make one clutch of a bird that's 1/3 of an ounce. These are tiny birds. And if you want chickadees breeding in your yard, and you do because they're running out of other places to breed, you have to have all those caterpillars in your yard. They're not going to fly 5 miles down the road to the nearest woodlot to get them. As a matter of fact, they forage only about 50 meters from the nest. And if you don't have all those caterpillars in your yard, you're not going to have breeding chickadees. That's called insect decline, when we landscape in a way that doesn't create this many caterpillars. And when we have insect declines, it's really looking like that's a major cause of bird declines. We went to the original data from Rosenberg et al. That said we've lost 3 billion birds in the last 50 years. And we divided birds that they looked at into 2 groups. These are terrestrial birds. The one group was the birds that required insects at some point in their life history, typically while they were breeding, and the other group was the birds that do not require insects. They can live off of seeds. So things like finches and doves can make a milk out of the seeds and feed their young with that. They actually gained some numbers during that 50 periods, but the 50-year period. The insects that or the birds that require insects lost on average 10 million individuals per species. So this doesn't prove cause and effect between insect decline and bird decline, but it certainly is suggestive that there is a relationship there. So I'm taking this to mean that we really need to have more caterpillars in our landscapes. So we need to create a new goal for the way we landscape. In the past, it has been we want to landscape for aesthetics only. That's not working very well. So we need to add caterpillars and other insects to the landscape. How do we do that? We do that by adding the plants that make them. That seems easy enough, but there is a catch, and that is not all plants make insects. As a matter of fact, most plants don't make very many insects at all. Why not? Well, insects are really fussy about which plants they can eat. The monarch butterfly illustrates it beautifully. If you have burning bush or calorie pear or boxwood or your hostas or all of the barberry, any of the Asian plants that we tend to landscape with, none of those are going to meet the nutritional needs of monarchs. Monarchs require milkweeds, and that is the only thing they're going to eat. That's called host plant specialization, and it turns out that most of the insects that eat plants are host plant specialists. Why is that? Well, most insects are host plant specialists because plants have made them that way. Plants don't want to be eaten. They want to capture the energy from the sun and use it for their own growth and reproduction. So they've loaded their leaves with nasty tasting chemicals, secondary metabolic compounds that make those leaves either bitter or downright toxic. And it's a really effective defense that keeps most of the insects of the world from eating most of the plants of the world. And that's why it's green out there in the summertime. It's not because there are no insects out there that want to eat those plants. It's because most of the insects that are out there cannot eat most of those plants. If you don't believe me, next spring, go out and find a leaf and eat it. See if you like it. You're not going to like it. There's a reason it's hard to get our kids to eat vegetables. They inherently know that they're toxic. Yes, that's my little joke. But this is not a joke. Insects do eat plants. How do they do that? How do they get around those chemical defenses? Well, this is where the specialization comes in. 90% of the insects that eat plants are host plant specialists. All plant lineages protect themselves from insect herbivory. So insects cannot adapt to all of those types of defenses. So they pick one or two plant lineages and they get good at getting around those particular plant defenses. They develop the enzymes that store and excrete and detoxify those compounds, the behavioral adaptations, the life history adaptations that minimize their exposure to those compounds. But it takes a long period of evolutionary history for all those adaptations to fall into place. And that's why when we bring in plants from other continents, things like Bradford pear, calorie pear, nothing can eat it because they haven't been here long enough for these adaptations to fall into place. You might say, well, they've been there 100 years. That's true, but it takes tens of thousands of years for that type of evolution to occur. All I'm trying to say here is that plant choice matters. If we're trying to rebuild functional food webs in areas where we've dismantled them, we have to choose the plants that are going to support those food webs. And I'm going to give you 3 examples of how well this can work, starting with our house here in Oxford, Pennsylvania. I'm sitting in that window right now. We bought, there was a farm that was broken up into 10-acre lots. We bought one of them in Southeast Pennsylvania. This was an old farm, been worked very hard since the late 1600s. So we're talking about 300 years of farming here. And the last bit of farming they did before we moved in was to mow the entire property for hay. But it was so heavily invaded with Asian ornamentals, things like calorie pear and ornamental Oriental bittersweet and Japanese honeysuckle and bush honeysuckle and multiflora rose and miscanthus and porcelain berry and on and on. You know what all these things are. So when they actually mowed, they were just mowing the rootstocks of all these invasive species, and they called that hay. Well, anyway, before we moved in, of course, they stopped mowing and everything grew back. So the entire 10 acres looked like this when we moved in. This is my wife, Cindy. She's getting ready to get rid of this tangle of multiflora rose and Oriental bittersweet. If you have a bad invasive problem, don't despair. Just remember Cindy here. She got rid of most of what was on the 10 acres alone. I mean, I helped a little bit, but not all that much. I was doing other things. One of the things I was doing was telling her she was doing a great job. But the other thing I was doing was putting the plants back. And I was doing it selfishly. I chose plants that I hoped would attract moths that I could take pictures of because that's what I like to do. I wanted to attract the Canadian owlet, so I could take that picture, and that's what the adult looks like. But in order to do that, I had to put in meadow rue. That's the only plant that Canadian owlet will develop on. Typical host plant specialist. Well, we didn't have any meadow rue. I mean, it used to be here hundreds of years ago, I'm sure, but long gone. And there's no meadow rue anywhere around us that I could find. So I got some seeds from someplace else. I planted them. They grew very well, but I was experimenting. I didn't know whether Canadian owlets would ever be able to find my meadow rue, and I certainly didn't think they would find it very quickly. So I didn't even check the meadow rue for a month and a half after they were growing. Finally, I walked by and they were almost defoliated by Canadian owlets. They had found it right away. So that was a big success. Now I've got a lot of Meadow and a lot of Canadian owlets. There you go. I've added 2 species to the property. I wanted to have this beautiful moth, the goldenrod stowaway. That's a misnomer, by the way. It has nothing to do with goldenrod. It's a specialist on this plant, Biden's aristosa. I did know where there was some Biden's aristosa, ditch daisy, in a power line cut about 14 miles away. So I went and got some seeds, planted them. They grew very, very nicely. But it took about a year for that moth, the goldenrod stowaway, to find it, but now I have a good population of both. So now I've added 4 species to the property. I wanted hackberry emperor because it's a butterfly that ought to be here. It's not the prettiest butterfly, but it's one of the species that ought to be on our property. But as the name suggests, it's a specialist on hackberry, and we didn't have any hackberry. So I planted some hackberry. It took 3 or 4 years for the butterflies to find them. But when they did, they're doing really well. I looked at one of my hackberries, just one branch this June as I was walking by, and there were 9 hackberry emperor caterpillars on it. So another big success. Added 6 species. I did not plant goldenrod. It came in on its own, and along with it came many of the things that eat goldenrod. There are actually 110 species of caterpillars that eat goldenrod in our area. So things like the brown-hooded owlet and the Arsidra flower moth, the goldenrod leaf miner, the distinct Sparaginothus, the goldenrod gall moth. Here's what I'm waiting for, the goldenrod flower moth and its larvae. I don't know why they haven't found our goldenrod yet. We've got plenty of it, but they haven't. So this is anticipation. This is like waiting for the ketchup to come out of the bottle. Every year I go out to look for my goldenrod flower moths, and one of these years I will find it, and that'll be a great day. So on and on we go. I've added Virginia creeper because it's a wonderful host plant for a number of sphinx moths, like the Pandora sphinx. That's what the adult looks like. The lettered sphinx, the hog sphinx, the abbot sphinx, and many other types of caterpillars. Very strong plant. I wanted the zebra swallowtail because I think it's our prettiest swallowtail. I like beauty like anybody else. But I was pushing it here because we are really north of the, we're at the northern limit of this butterfly. It's a specialist on pawpaw, and we're at the northern limit of pawpaw in the east as well. But we planted pawpaw anyway. The nearest population that I know of is 26 miles south of us, and I didn't know whether they would get this far north. We had to wait 9 years, but they finally did make it. We've got a population of the zebra swallowtail. We certainly have our pawpaws. In the meantime, we got the pawpaw sphinx. I didn't know there was a pawpaw sphinx, and lots of pawpaws. I wanted the double-tooth prominent because it's just one of the coolest caterpillars out there. It's a specialist on elm. We planted American elm. They're doing very well. Wanted the evening primrose moth, again, because it's a beautiful moth. So we needed evening primrose, planted them. They spend the day hiding in the flowers. It's very cute. And I planted lots of oaks. Now, those are just examples of the plants that I put in our yard, but I want to focus on oaks for a minute because they're such important plants. This is the Bedford oak in Bedford, New York. People argue about whether it's 400 years old or 500 years old. It's enormous. But a lot of people make the mistake of thinking you have to have an enormous oak before it can start contributing to your property. I hear people say all the time, I'm not going to plant an oak because I won't live long enough to enjoy it. Well, unless you die before next year, you really can enjoy it. And you can enjoy all the things the oaks do for you. And I can say that with confidence because I planted my oaks mostly from acorns, but a few from 2-foot bare root whips. And right away, they started to attract the insects that started to run the food webs in our yard. Things like the solitary oak leaf miner, juvenile's dusky wing, the yellow-shouldered moth, the orange-headed epicalema, the red-washed caterpillar, the yellow-vested moth, the orange-tufted oneida, the spiny oak caterpillar, the two-spotted oak punky, the variable oak leaf caterpillar, the red-humped oak worm, the orange-humped oak worm, the pink-striped oak worm, the delightful dagger moth, the pleasant dagger moth, the lesser oak dagger moth, the greater oak dagger moth, the streaked dagger moth, the afflicted dagger moth, the crowned bucolatrix, the white blotch heterocampa, the oblique heterocampa, the red-line panapoda, the laugher, and literally hundreds more species of moths have come to our oaks. And they come right away. This is a pin oak that's just popped up above the leaf surface there, and there's a crocus geometer standing on the ground eating its leaves. You don't have to wait a long time before your oaks start to contribute. This is a picture of our house from the same perspective that I took the first picture. I'm still sitting in that window right up there. We do have lawn. We're very traditional here, but we put plants back. Now, not all of them. I'm still adding plants to the property. And every time I do, new lineages of moths come. And about 4 years ago, I decided, boy, I've got so many moths. I want to try to take pictures of every single species that we have just to see how many species we do have. I am up to 1,026 species. I got another new one last night, believe it or not. Now we're on 10 acres in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is 2.4 million acres, but we have 40% of all the moth species that occur in Pennsylvania on our 10 acres, on 1/240,000th of the land mass. And each one of these species of moths is it's a bird species of bird food. And that's probably why we've recorded 59 species of terrestrial birds that have bred on our 10 acres, which is 38% of all the terrestrial birds that breed in Pennsylvania. It's been a big success, and we're still going. About 2 weeks ago, we saw this headline: World Wildlife Fund predicts, well, not only predict, they have measured, we have lost 2/3 of Earth's wildlife in the last, since 1970. It's a really depressing headline, but I'm thinking, not at my house. At our house, I will wager we have increased biodiversity by at least 2/3, which is, it's such a positive message. This is reversible. We don't have to despair. We just have to put the plants back, and we can save most of the wildlife that is out there. But I know what you're thinking. You don't live on 10 acres. You're in a little suburban plot. Can it work in suburbia? Well, that's a good question. Let's go to Margie and Dan Terpstra's house in Kirkwood, Missouri. I visited them just before the virus broke out. They live in a typical suburban neighborhood. They have 0.6 acres, a little bit more than half an acre, so about 18 times less land than Cindy and I have. And their neighbors, surrounded by neighbors with big lawns, very typical suburbia. The big invasive plant in Kirkwood, Missouri is bush honeysuckle. So the first thing they did when they moved in was take out their bush honeysuckle. They planted lots of species of native plants, and they installed what they call a bubbler, a little water feature. And then they sat back and started to count the birds that are using their yard. They are up to 149 bird species, 35 warbler species. Just to put that in perspective, on our 10 acres, we've only recorded 8 warbler species at our house. So does it work on a smaller property? It sure does. But what about an urban yard? Let's go to Pam Carlson's house in Chicago, and I mean in Chicago. She lives right next to one of the runways of O'Hare Airport, right next to Kennedy Expressway. She only has 1/10 of an acre. That's 3 times smaller than the average lot size in North America. Well, she did the same thing. She took out her invasive plants, put in 60 species of native plants, a little water feature. And she's counting her birds. She's up to 116 species of birds that have used her yard, including a woodcock. There's Pam's woodcock. There is no connectivity with Pam's yard and any other natural area in Chicago there. So she is a little island, and yet it's still attracting all this life. But what about city centers? 82% of us live in cities. Well, in 2014, I was looking at this plant, Asclepias tuberosa. People call it butterfly weed, but that reminds me we have a marketing issue with our native plants. We call them weeds and wonder why people don't plant them. So we're not going to call this butterfly weed. We're going to call it Monarch's Delight. I was staring at Monarch's Delight 2014, and I saw 2 species right away, 2 species of leafcutter bee, of megachilid bee. I know they're leafcutter bees because they collect their pollen on their tummy and not on their legs. Well, leafcutter bees have very specific requirements. Not only do they need pollen and nectar, but they need soft leaves because they carve the edges out of those soft leaves, roll them up, stuff pollen in it, and then lay an egg on it. And that is how they reproduce. Then they take that whole package and put it in a crack or a crevice. Well, there was a redbud leaf with soft leaves growing right next to Monarch's Delight. And that explains why there were leafcutter bees there. They had everything they needed. And because there was a redbud there, that means that there was early spring bloom that would support queen bumblebees. Now remember, a bumblebee colony doesn't start out with a bunch of workers. It's the queen that overwinters, and she does all the work by herself until she makes the first generation of young. So she needs a lot of very efficient foraging, or the colony's going to fail. But because there was a redbud there giving her a lot of early season forage, she had what she needed, and there were bumblebees there. And then I saw a monarch. I actually saw 2 monarchs on Monarch Delight here. This was 2014. In 2013, I had gone the entire year, without seeing a single monarch, because that was the low point of the monarch population. 3.6% of the monarchs left compared to 1976. So here it is, 2014. Now I'm seeing 2 monarchs, and it was early in the season. It was June, which is that we don't usually get monarchs this far north in June. So I was very excited. It looked like, well, maybe the monarchs aren't going to disappear after all. Why were they there? Well, they had monarch's delight, but they also had another species of milkweed. So they had nectar, but they also had their host plant. They were there to lay eggs and reproduce. They had everything they needed. Do you know where I was? I was on the High Line in the middle of Manhattan. I was on an elevated railroad they call the High Line that has a planting of largely native plants, but not entirely, 30 feet above the taxis, right next to all the construction. Millions, literally millions of people visit the High Line every year. It's now a tourist destination. Very popular place, but the megachilids, the leafcutter bees, the monarchs don't mind at all. This is Rick Dark, who was trying to get me to visit the High Line for years, actually. I'm not much of a city boy, so I wasn't excited about going into Manhattan to see pretty plants. I wanted to see the things that were on those plants, and I was convinced there would be nothing on the plants. This is the middle of Manhattan. What's going to go use plants there? But I was totally wrong. So I'm glad Rick dragged me there because it proved that thoughtful native plantings can bring life to the middle of Manhattan. If we can do that there, we can do that anywhere. Somebody's doing a survey of the bees on the High Line now. They're up to 30 species. So it works. But if we're going to enjoy success big time, there's 4 things we need to consider. And the first one is we have to shrink the area that's in lawn. Because lawn is a dead space. It's a status symbol. It proves we're good citizens, and that's all great. But we've got 40 million acres of lawn. That's the size of New England that we have taken out of ecosystem production, all for show. So I'm suggesting that we cut the area of lawn in half. The area that we keep will still be highly manicured. We can still be good citizens. We can still show our neighbors that we're playing the cultural game. But we're going to put a lot of plants back and increase ecosystem function. And if we do that on half the area that's in lawn right now, that'll give us 20 million acres to use for conservation right where we live. And if we do it at home, we can create a new national park that we can call Homegrown National Park. And it'll be bigger than the Adirondacks, plus Yellowstone, plus Yosemite, Grand Tetons, Canyonlands, Mount Rainier, North Cascades, Badlands National Park, Olympic National Park, Sequoia National Park, the Grand Canyon, plus Denali, which is huge, plus the Great Smoky Mountains. You add up all those parks, still less than 20 million acres. Homegrown National Park will be the biggest park in the country. And if we put nature back in places right where we're living, there are immediate benefits. One of the biggest ones is we get to either develop a personal relationship with nature for the first time or rekindle one that we had when we were kids. And we can do it at our own pace, at our own time. All we have to do is walk outside. We can do it by avoiding crowds. If you go to a real national park, millions of people there. So you're really interacting with millions of people in traffic and everything else. No admission fee, it's free, and it's never closed. I don't care what pandemic comes down the pike, you can always go out in your yard. Avoid the travel hassles and experience that natural world alone. I don't know how you're ever going to develop a personal relationship with some part of nature unless you're alone. And this is particularly important for our kids. Richard Louv says they're suffering from nature deficit disorder. So we put them on a bus with 30 other kids and a teacher. We drive for an hour and they go out, walk around a natural area. Teacher tells them not to touch anything. Then they get back in the bus and go home. And I'm sure that's better than nothing. But what they've really experienced is 30 other kids and a teacher telling them not to touch anything. If they have some natural systems at home, they can walk outside and discover what's going on all by themselves. No parental supervision. Let them go out and discover the natural world. Maybe they will learn how to hunt lizards. I'm learning this from my own granddaughter, Zoe, who lives in Hawaii, and her patch of nature is pretty small. It's about 10 feet by 10 feet. She's got grass and a hedge, but there are anole lizards there. So she sent me this picture to tell me how to hunt anole lizards. You get on the ground and you disguise yourself with sticks and leaves so the lizards don't see you coming. And then you crawl very slowly towards the lizards. No smiling. This is serious stuff. You can wear your best dress, that's okay. But you sneak up on the lizard, you catch the lizard and you put them in an aquarium, and there's your personal relationship with some part of the natural world. I don't think Zoe's going to be doing this the rest of her life, but I guarantee she will remember hunting lizards in Hawaii the rest of her life. If you want to do more than hunt lizards, get Nancy Stranisti's book, Nature Play at Home. Dozens and dozens of ideas about how to expose kids to nature right where you live. All right, we're going to shrink the lawn. And which means we're going to put plants back in half the area that's in lawn. But those plants, these are the ones we have to choose very carefully. We have to make sure that at least some of them are what I call keystone plants. One of the most important things we've learned in our lab in recent years is that all native plants do not contribute equally to the food webs that are supporting everything else. It turns out that there are a few powerhouses, about 5% of our native plants are making about 75% of that caterpillar food that drives food webs. 14% of our native plants are making 90% of the caterpillar food. And this relationship holds no matter where you are in the country, very, very consistent relationship. So what that means is most of our native plants, about 85% of them, aren't contributing all that much. So the question is no longer simply, are native plants better than non-natives? On average, they certainly are, but I can construct an all-native landscape that supports very little if I choose the plants that are unproductive. So the question really is, do we want ecologically productive plants in our yards, or benign plants, or even worse, the ecologically destructive plants that we've been relying on for the last 100 years? And I'm talking about those Asian ornamentals, the ones that are invasive. They escape our yards. Things like calorie pear, one of the worst, burning bush, barberry, porcelain berry, autumn olive. All these things were brought over as ornamentals, and we're still selling a lot of them. And they're biologically well, they're pollutants. They escape into our natural areas and they degrade it ecologically because they don't support those insects even in our natural areas. So that's the question today. I get emails once or twice a year from somebody saying, don't you know that ginkgos, ginkgo biloba from Asia, actually grew in North America 7 million years ago? That makes them native so we can plant them. Well, yes, I do know that ginkgos grew in North America 7 million years ago. We can argue about whether that makes them native, but I'm not going to bother arguing because that's not the question anymore. This is not our metric. It's not whether they're native or not. It's whether they're productive or not. I don't care if ginkgo grew on the moon 7 million years ago. It doesn't support any caterpillars at all. So you can put your ginkgo in, but it'll be a decoration. It'll be like a statue. It's not going to support the life that we need to support in our yards. What is? Well, in 84% of the counties of North America, oaks are the #1 keystone species. In the mid-Atlantic states, they support 557 species of caterpillars, 557 species of bird food. Nationwide, they support 900 species of caterpillars. There are no other plant genus that comes close to this in terms of productivity. Let me give you an idea of what keystone oaks are doing in our yard. And remember, I've taken pictures of 1,026 moss species. And that's just the moths. We haven't gotten to the butterflies yet. And out of the 1,026 species of moths, 901 have known host plants. So there's what, 125, I don't know what they're eating. But out of the 901 species, 265 species use oaks. Now we have 69 genera of native woody plants on our property, and only one of them is oaks, the quercus. And we have hundreds of genera of herbaceous plants. So oaks represent less than 1.5% of our woody plant diversity and way less than 1% of our total plant diversity, but they're supporting almost 30% of our moss species diversity. That's what a keystone plant does. Imagine what the diversity in my yard would be, not just of moths, but the birds that need those moths and every other thing, if we took the oaks out of our yard. How do you find out what keystone species are for where you live? You go to Native Plant Finder on the National Wildlife Federation website. Put in your zip code, and the ranked list of the most productive plants, ranked in terms of the number of caterpillar species that they support, will pop up for your county. So this is what something for the Pine Barren areas of New Jersey would look like. Oaks are #1, and a very good oak for your area would be scarlet oak, followed by prunus. And the black cherry is the one you're going to want in the Pine Barrens, followed by native willows. Black willow would be the one that you'd want to get. Pitch pine, blueberries, red maple, white cedars. These are all keystone plants. And I stopped because I ran out of room. Top producing herbaceous plants would be goldenrods, asters, helianthus, native sunflowers. Well, all the sunflowers are native, but the perennial ones are very productive. Not only are these the three best in terms of supporting caterpillars, and of course you've got seaside goldenrod, which is probably the prettiest of all the goldenrods. But they're also the best in terms of supporting specialist bees. With just those three genera, Solidago, asters, and helianthus, you can have up to 40 species of native bees. But if you don't have those genera on your property, you've just lost 40 species of native bees. That's the power of keystone plants. All right, we're going to shrink the lawn. We're going to attract all these insects to our yard, particularly the moths. Then we're going to kill them at night with our security lights. And of course, that is not the goal. There's research, particularly from Europe, which is identifying light pollution at night as one of the major causes of insect declines, at least in the temperate zone. We don't know why insects go to lights, even after studying it for 100 years, but we know that they do, particularly moths again. And these are all the ways that it kills them. Moths fly around and around and around the light till they die of exhaustion. They collide with the light. They get incinerated. They die of dehydration. The bat comes and eats them. Bright lights will blind a lot of nocturnal insects. Who knew? And then it messes up what they're supposed to be doing. They're supposed to be finding a mate and laying their eggs and doing all that stuff. So deadly, these light pollution is deadly to many of our nocturnal insects. But to me, this is good news. Because if this is one of the major causes of insect decline, it's also one of the easiest things to turn around. Just turn your light off. What could be easier than that? But I know what you're going to say. I have to have my light on because the bad man will come. Okay, put a motion sensor on your light. So it only turns on when the bad man comes. And the first thing you're going to realize is that the bad man doesn't come very often. If you don't want to do that, take the white light out of your security light, the white bulb, and put in a yellow bulb. Mercury vapor lamps are the very worst. Make sure you change those out. Put in a yellow bulb because yellow wavelengths are far less attractive to insects, and yellow LED lights are the least attractive. If we were to switch out our night lights for yellow LED lights all over the place, not only would we save billions of insects almost instantly, we'd save a whole lot of energy as well. The fourth thing we need to do is landscape in a way that allows caterpillars to complete their development. What do I mean by that? Well, I live in Chester County, Pennsylvania, where oaks support 511 species of caterpillars. Some of them, a few of them, complete their development on the tree. So here's a polyphemus moth caterpillar. It eats the leaves, then it spins a cocoon and hangs from one of the branches. Then it emerges as an adult and it does it all over again. And I wish all of them did that, but they don't. 94%, 480 species drop from the tree and wiggle their way underground and pupate underground, or they spin a cocoon in the leaf litter that is under the tree. And that's the problem. There is no leaf litter under the tree, and we mow and compact the soil under our typical plantings to the point where the ground's so hard the caterpillar can't get underneath. So this becomes an ecological trap. The adult moths come in, fly and lay their eggs there, they hatch, the caterpillar develops, drops down, and dies. And the next generation will be smaller, and the next generation of that after that will probably be gone. I am convinced that this is another major cause of insect declines, simply because of the way we landscape. And of course, the cement landscape is going to be even less of a viable option for moths. I'm not trying to discourage the use of trees in cities. I'm trying to discourage the profligate use of cement when it's unnecessary. This is just laziness. And of course, we know that this much cement destroys our watersheds. This is what most people do. We have a tree and a big lawn, and nobody's measured how well the caterpillars do when they drop down in a situation like this. But I guarantee they do better in a situation like this, where you have a tree, then you have a layered landscape. So you could have a dogwood over here, then you have a native azalea and ferns and ground cover. The caterpillar drops down into a safe site. Nobody's going to step on it. The ground is soft. They can get underground. They can spin their cocoon. They're not going to be mowed. This is where you do your spring ephemeral garden. This is how you shrink the lawn. Build a big bed around your trees. They're safe sites. So you can, if you're a fancy gardener, this is the way to do it. But what you're doing is creating a very happy situation for your tree and a safe site for your caterpillars. You can use your ground covers here, wild ginger or native pachysandra or mayapple or foam flower, lots of examples of that, and they're all safe sites. Another graduate student, Desiree Narango, has done research with chickadees in the suburbs of Washington, D.C., and her results suggest that there is room for compromise in our plant choice, and that's good news. What she did was she compared how well chickadee populations can sustain themselves in typical suburban landscapes that are landscaped primarily with natives. None of her landscapes were 100% native, or the typical landscape dominated by introduced plants from Asia. First thing she found is when the landscapes are dominated by Asian plants, they produce 75% fewer caterpillars. So right away, the chickadees had 75% less food. Those landscapes were 60% less likely to have breeding chickadees at all, even though there were nest boxes up in everybody's yard. The chickadees would come and they'd look around and say, there's not enough food here. We're not even going to try. If they did try, those nests contained 1.5 fewer eggs. Those clutches were 29% less likely to make it to fledging at all. If they did make it to fledging, they produced 1.2 fewer fledglings, and it took them 1.5 days longer to do that. So you might say, well, those aren't huge differences, but when you put them all together into a population growth model, this is what you get as a function of the percentage of woody plant biomass that is non-native in your yard, from no non-natives to 100%. This dotted line is replacement rate. This is the rate at which the population has to make babies to replace the adults that die every year. If you're reproducing at this rate, then you have a sustainable population. It's not growing, but it's not shrinking. If you make more babies than adults die, you have a growing population. But if you make fewer babies, you have a shrinking, unsustainable population. Right here is where they overlap, though, right around 30% non-native woody plant biomass. If you exceed that, you have too many non-natives in your yard, you're down into this area, and you will have an unsustainable breeding situation for your chickadees or any other bird that's trying to breed there. But this is exciting to me for two reasons. First of all, it's the first time this has been measured for any bird anywhere. So it clearly demonstrates that your plant choices really are impacting the birds that we love. But this is that area of compromise that I was talking about. You can have up to 30% of your woody plant biomass be non-native without destroying the sustainability of your bird populations. So you can have your ginkgo, you can have your crepe myrtle, you can have your boxwood. You can't have any invasive plants, no calorie pears, but those others aren't going to go anywhere. They can be accents. And to me, that's really good news because we love our non-native plants. We love how pretty they are. And if my message was you can't have any non-native plants, I'd have far fewer people listening to me. Can native plants be used in formal designs? Of course they can. Here's a garden in North Carolina where they are switching out the non-natives for natives. Here's Joe Pye here. Notice I called it Joe Pye, not Joe Pye weed. It's not a weed. And their goal is to replace all of these plants with native plants and then take another picture and send it to me. Formality is a function of the design. It's not a function of the plants in the design. Our native plants are used in formal designs in Europe all the time. And I guess that's okay because they're non-native over there. Can we get a pollinator garden into a traditional suburban yard like this without offending anybody? Of course we can. Just put a little fence around it. It's beautiful. It's functional. There are a number of native bee species that can use this planting. And if everybody did it, we'd be able to sustain native bee populations far better than we're doing right now. Let's talk for a minute about why we need pollinators. I mean, the reason I hear all the time is that they pollinate a third of our crops. That's not true. May Berenbaum looked at that research again, and the best she could come up with is they pollinate about 12% of our crops, and it's closer to 7% with our terrible diets. We just eat corn and soybeans, and that's about it. And if people don't live next to agriculture, they say, well, I don't need any pollinators. So let's not talk that way. We need pollinators because they pollinate 80% of all plants and 90% of all flowering plants. If we were to lose our pollinators, we'd lose 80 to 90% of the plants on the planet. Not an option. Where do we need these pollinators? Everywhere where we need plants, which is everywhere, which means our yards too. How about this? This is a Drew Latham design. It's much bigger than the little one with the fence. Compare the amount of life that is here with the amount of life that is here. 0 versus a lot. Can municipalities help us live with nature? Of course they can. And there's more and more examples where this is happening. Minnesota has a cost sharing plan that encourages homeowners to remove some or all of their lawn and replace it with appropriate Minnesota prairie plants. They help you pay for it. It's a great program. Florida, there's an island, Florida, that's encouraging people to allow burrowing owls to burrow in their front yard. And if they do, they'll pay you to protect that owl. This is the way the Endangered Species Act should have been written. Should have been written with carrots, not with sticks. Rather than punishing you by telling you can't use your property, there's an endangered species on it, we should give you a tax break or pay you in some way. Everybody would want an endangered species. Missouri had, I don't think they have it anymore, but they had a bounty on Galloway pears, one of the most invasive plants we can put into our landscapes. If you brought in I don't know, I'm sure people didn't bring in the Galloway pear they chopped down, but a picture of it or something, they would give you a free tree replacement. And Fayetteville, Arkansas has the same program right now. San Antonio water system of public utilities giving people $100 coupons to put in water efficient native plants in areas where there's not much rain. And of course, there's all those lawn replacement programs in the far west, particularly California, up to $2 per square foot rebate if you get rid of your thirsty lawn and put in xeric plantings. I think we've made 3 missteps in the early years of conservation. By early years, I mean the last century. One is we've assumed that nature's important, but it's not essential. You know, we like it, but if when push comes to shove, it means if it's not essential, then it's always going to take a back seat. I was just this morning, I was thumbing through an old Time magazine looking at the 100 most influential people of 2020. You know how many people were in that list that were working on saving biodiversity? None. There was one who was working on climate change. Everybody else was entertainment or something else, politics. It just shows you where the natural world is in our ranking of importance. I went to the Cincinnati Zoo just before the virus broke out, and there was this wall-sized poster there saying, "Save wildlife for future generations." And it's my experience that even our top conservation biologists have this mindset. We want to save nature so that our kids can enjoy it in the future because it's a wonderful thing. And I certainly understand that. But to me, that suggests nature's there just for entertainment. It's much more urgent than that. We need to save nature so that we have future generations. Number 2, we've assumed that humans and nature cannot coexist. Now, I mentioned this earlier, but if we restrict our conservation efforts just to areas where we have very few humans, we're going to fail. Because that means those areas will be too small and too isolated from each other to sustain the amount of nature that we need. David Quammen has an excellent analogy between a Persian rug and an ecosystem. This is a functioning Persian rug. That is not 71 Persian rugs. That's 71 rug fragments, none of which are functioning like a Persian rug. And this is what we've done to our ecosystems. The UN designates biosphere reserves as places of ecological significance. And I hate that language because it suggests there are places on planet Earth with no ecological significance. Not so. Every square inch of the Earth has ecological significance, even our yards. So what we need to do is glue our rug back together again. We need to these white areas are no man's land. Nothing can survive in there. So we've got to put the plants back that will allow not just biological corridors where plants and animals can move back and forth between real habitats, but we're going to create real habitat where there isn't any right now. We're going to favor those keystone plants, put a lot more plants in there, reduce the amount of lawn, add our pollinator gardens. We're going to make viable habitat, but it means we're going to have to start living with nature. Our third misstep was to leave Earth stewardship just to a few specialists, a few ecologists, a few conservation biologists. We didn't see it as an inherent responsibility of every human being on the planet. And I have no idea why not. Every person on the planet depends entirely on the quality of Earth's ecosystems. So why wouldn't everybody have the responsibility for good Earth stewardship? Sam Rushworth, a Cherokee elder, once said that the Western settler mindset was, I have rights. The mindset of indigenous people is, I have obligations. You're not born with these mindsets, you're taught them. And we're good at teaching this one. We have been terrible at teaching our obligations for stewarding planet Earth. It doesn't mean you have to save biodiversity for a living, although it's a good living, but you can save it where you live. I love this approach because it empowers each one of us. You know, right now, so many of us feel absolutely powerless. The Earth's problems are huge, and it really is easy to feel like one person can't make a difference. But in this case, the cliche works. One person can make a difference. Go out and plant that oak tree. Plant one of those powerhouse plants, shrink your lawn, put in your pollinator garden, get rid of your invasive species. As one person, you've created a piece of homegrown national park. You've become a very important cog in the future wheel of conservation, and it's just one of you doing it. It also shrinks the problem down to something that's manageable for each one of us. Don't think about the entire planet's problems. You will get depressed if you do that. Just think about your little piece of the earth. If you own land, fix it up. There's not one of us who can't improve the property that we live on. And if everybody who owned land did, it would be 85% done. If you don't own land, you can volunteer, help somebody who does, volunteer for a land conservancy, volunteer in your nearest park or preserve. They're all underfunded, understaffed. They will love you. So as property owners or as volunteers, each one of us has the power. We certainly have the responsibility to fix dead landscapes like this. Whether or not we decide to do so is going to determine nature's fate and ultimately our own fate. And I've convinced my grandchildren that you are nature's best hope. I hope I've convinced you as well. Thanks very much. I'm done.
I know, coming back on. Thank you. Thanks, Doug. I'm going to bring you back on here, and I'm going to bring on some other people as well, because we have some questions. If you can hang around a little bit longer.
I can hang around, yeah.
Awesome, thank you. Bring on some other people here. So we're going to bring on some other panelists from the Native Plant Society. Barb Feeler's on with us. Jessie, you can come on as well. I'd like to bring her on. There she is. Thank you for coming on. We did have some questions come in prior to when we did the sign up. Before we get to that, because I know I'm going to forget, we like to thank the folks at the Evesham Green Team. They donated 2 books to give away to 2 lucky participants. And before we started, we had Doug pick 2 numbers from those who are attending by the number that when you actually signed up. So the 2 lucky winners are Beth Wild from Cape May Courthouse and Nancy Riggs from Holden, Massachusetts. We'll email you for your address and you get each a free book, one of Doug's books. So we're really happy to have that. I am going to bring up a couple questions just to get us started. And then I see there's some chats going on down there and there's some hands raised. So we'll see how many questions we can get going. One of the questions or a number of people had was that homeowners associations, there are some pushbacks from that about what you can plant. So I wanted to see, Doug, if you've had that question before.
Yeah, it's a huge problem that we have. You know, if you trace how these HOA rules came into place, they typically were developed during the 70s or shortly thereafter. This is, you know, back in the day where a lot of people had rusty cars in their front yard, and the message was, hey, we're a high-class neighborhood and there are rules and you've got to fit in if you want to live here. And that all made sense. But you had people that were trying to elevate the status of the neighborhood that didn't know anything about plants or about ecology, making these rules. And some of the rules are really strict, like you got to have a lot of lawn. Every plant, they tell you exactly what plant it has to be. And, you know, it's always an Asian plant. And well, we've learned a lot since then. I mean, so we've moved way past that. I am not proposing that we create ugly landscapes. We're still going to be high quality citizens. There are many, we call them cues for care, and lawn is a great cue for care. The lawn you have is going to be manicured. It's going to be mowed. You can use it as edging for the plantings. We're simply going to have more plants in our landscapes. And if it's properly done, I don't think there's a homeowner association in the country that would object to it. A lot of people say, well, I'm just going to stop mowing my lawn and let it go natural. And that's fine. You know, they ought to have the right to do that. But I understand people say, that's not our aesthetic. we should be sensitive to the culture today and maybe put our prairie plantings and things that spend the entire winter looking like they're dead. They're not, but they look like they're dead. Maybe put those in the backyard until people catch on that we're gardening for function. Another thing that really helps is one of the signs, you know, the National Wildlife Federation habitat sign or Audubon signs. Everybody's got signs saying this is a wildlife sanctuary. And believe me, those signs really mean a lot. People say, "Oh, okay, you know, it's purposeful. There's a reason here." That seems to get you a long way. But I actually got a letter today from a poor woman who worked really hard in her yard, and they made her rip the whole thing out. So we're not there yet, but how you do it is important. Adding plants, adding the right plants can be done in tasteful ways that doesn't trigger that HOA problem.
Yeah. Have you seen any towns, either in Pennsylvania or locally, that have passed ordinances regarding planting of native plants versus
Yes,
non-native?
more and more. I actually have an ordinance on my computer. If anybody wants it, I can send it to you. From Hyattsville, Maryland, they wrote one up. Reston, Virginia wrote one. They're all over the place. I can't remember all these things, but yeah, it's becoming a lot more commonplace.
That was another one of that's one of my questions as well. We'd like to forward that along in Galloway. Jesse and Barb, there was a couple questions about where locally in South Jersey you might be able to buy native plants, a good place to get them.
Okay, I will turn that over to you guys. Excuse me.
Jesse, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I always, I'll respond to this question. So Jesse Connor, Barb, and I are co-chairs of the Native Plant Society. I usually tell people when asked this question in South Jersey to go on to Pat Sutton's website, and I know Mary will send that link out after the program. Pat has a group called the Gardening Gang. It's over 1,000 strong, and some of you probably got notice of this, Doug's talk tonight through that email source, and she updates the list of native plant growers on a regular basis. The Native Plant Society of New Jersey also has a list on their website. It includes both the retail and wholesale plant growers. Locally, we have Meadowsweet, which is in Mays Landing, New Jersey, and we also have I'm blanking on the name, Ravens,
Earth First.
Earth First, both of which are very good local sources of native plants. So Mary will send those links out to you today or tomorrow.
Yeah, tomorrow I will put together a lot of the links, a lot of information that we gathered here today, and anyone who signed up, we have your email. So that's why we collected those, and we'll definitely send those out. What to do is open it up to people that are on here. And if you raise your hand on the right-hand side, we can call on you and open it up. So it looks like Joyce Wright just unmuted you. Did you have a question? Nope. Okay. There's a Kathleen. Let's see if we can get you to ask the question.
Did anybody put questions in the chat?
Yeah, let's bring up the chat. We'll do it that way. So let's see who we got here. We have lots of suggestions as people read through there's lots of different farms and nurseries out there. So if you look through the chat and it's in your area, you might want to write that down. Let's see what else we can get in here.
Mary, can I ask a question?
Go
There are a
for it.
lot of people that pose this question to Doug about deer and deer browsing, and whether or not you needed to put up a huge fence or what you could do.
Another one of our serious problems. We have way too many deer. They're way over the carrying capacity, ability of our land to support them indefinitely. So they love edge habitat, which we've created everywhere. And they eat browse. That's woody stems. So they're always snipping our plants. They have palates as well as insects, and they prefer the tasteful native plants way over the invasive plants. As a matter of fact, it's the deer that has created the invasiveness of a lot of the species. You know, they don't like burning bush, they don't like barberry, they don't like calorie pear, so they avoid them, and then they eat our oaks and the other things, and that really tips the balance. So what do? The ultimate solution to this is to get the deer population down where it belongs. And we can do that by introducing predators. That's actually happening on one level. You know, coyotes will take fawns for the first couple of days, not very long. But we have this open season on coyotes. We shoot them anytime we want, when actually the only predator that will help us at this point. So we're probably not going to bring wolves and mountain lions back, which means we're going to have to control the deer on our own. Now, I know the individual homeowner is not going to be able to do that. So what do you do in the meantime? I use cages. So when I plant a young plant that I know the deer are going to like, I have these, you know, you go get the 5-foot rolls of galvanized wire at the hardware store. I make a cage maybe 4 or 5 feet wide, and you know, I'm still using the cages I made 20 years ago. You just keep moving them around on new plants as I call it graduation, when they grow past the size that the deer are really going to bother. And that works. You know, it's ugly for a while, but it works. The other solution would be to fence your whole property, which is expensive, and a lot of people aren't going to do that. But if you simply plant your oak tree and do nothing, the deer are going to come and eat it. And I'm really sorry about that, but it's a problem of our own making, and we're going to have to just address it. So the one thing I would suggest against, a lot of people say I want deer resistant plants, ones they won't eat. Things like spice bush. You know, you go into our woods and you look at the understory, and practically the only native plant other than the invasives is spice bush, because deer don't like it. Well, either do most of our insects. I mean, we do have the spice bush swallowtail and a few other things, but there's only 11 species of caterpillars that eat that versus the hundreds that eat oaks and the other things. So we don't want to create landscapes that are full of plants that deer won't eat, because they're also full of plants that insects won't eat. And that's the same thing as using those non-native plants.
The question we had come up on here, best, safest way to eliminate invasive plants. Is there one way that you can take them out, or does it depend on the plant?
Yeah, it depends on the plant. I would focus on the woody invasives first. Do you have Japanese stilt grass?
Yes.
Yes.
I'd focus on that last, because I have no solution for that one. I mean, but you know, a woody plant like autumn olive, something like that, it's a distinct plant. You can cut it off at the base. What you have to do is kill the rootstock. If you simply cut it down, it'll come right back. Now, if you're willing to do that repeatedly, if you only have a few and you don't want to use any herbicide, you can cut it down repeatedly until you have exhausted the root supply. That will happen over time, but it often takes years, and it takes constant cutting. And if you have a lot of them, that often is, you know, not a viable option. The other one is to use herbicide, but as little as possible. I never spray an entire plant, because you always hit everything you don't want to hit. I just cut and paint. It's using very little material, and you're painting the cambium of the root of the trunk that you just cut. And then it takes the material down and kills the roots. And then you don't have to do it again. You know, some people are just very strict to say, I'm not going to use any herbicide at all. And my wife actually is one of them. So if we use it, I have to do it when she's not there. But she is willing to go out and cut things back repeatedly. And so, but you have to kill the roots, or they're just going to keep coming back.
Yep. Are there any bad caterpillars? That was another
Yes,
question.
there are bad. Any caterpillar, any insect from another country, let's not use value judgments in good or bad, but they are here without their natural enemies. It's not their fault. We brought them here, but that means it's just like the deer without any natural enemies. They explode and then they get out of whack, and that's what the gypsy moth is. That's what the emerald ash borer is. That's what the hemlock woolly adelgid is. It's what the spotted lantern fly and the brown marmorated stink bug and all these guys that we brought over. The Japanese beetle has been here 100 years, but they have no natural enemy complex that keeps them in check. So we don't want to encourage any of them. We're dealing with, again, problems we've created. I know none of you have brought any over on your own, but they're here and they make life really, really difficult.
You had mentioned about the homegrown national park. Can you elaborate a little bit about the website and how people will connect regarding that?
Okay, we have a brand new website called homegrownnationalpark.com. And the object is, I've been talking to the choir for 15 years. And I met a woman last year who said, we've got to reach the non-choir. She's a marketer. Her name is Michelle Alfanderi. And she said, I want to create a website. I want to reach the non-choir, and we're going to have a fun map, and everybody can join Homegrown National Park and see it on the map and do all these things, all the things I never would have done on my own. And I said, I don't have time for this. And she said, I'll do it. And I said, okay, good. So she has done it, and people seem to like it. But so that's my new website, homegrownnationalpark.com. And the reason it's .com is it's expensive to keep this thing up. So we need donations just to have a web manager that can manage this map and everything else. But people, it's designed to be a social media type of encouragement to get people to join, really because other people are joining. But I didn't think it would work, but I think she was right. People all seem to be excited about it. I want to get on the map. The map isn't still actually working yet. The web designer is still trying to work things out, but you can load your information up that will then go onto the map when it's up, and we'll be able to see when we reach the 20 million acres. It's all going to light up. It'll be great. So join the map. That'll be good.
Awesome. Barb and Steve, did you have any questions, or did you want to add anything to the discussion tonight?
Doug, you mentioned several times about the Galloway, Bradford, and I assume Cleveland pear being the same basic tree.
Yeah, Bradford pear was the original cultivar that was sold saying it's sterile. It can't make any fruits and it'll be fine. Well, then they came up with other cultivars, which then crossed and created this entity that wasn't sterile at all, and that's what's really invasive. So they just call it Galloway pear now. Was there a question?
My question has been used so much that as a street tree and as an ornamental. Yeah. And a lot of towns are struggling to find street trees which will not get too big or interfere with car lines and be too small or the limbs will grow right into your face as you walk down the sidewalk and so forth. So Bradford performed a certain thing, but we struggle to find better alternatives to the Bradford pear. And I wanted to be able to suggest that to environmental commissions and green teams and public works people and all that.
Right. There are alternatives. First of all, we don't assume that every single oak tree is giant. Particularly some of your pine barren oaks are quite small, blackjack oak and scrub oak, dwarf chinkapin oak. I mean, they'll make acorns when they're 10 feet tall. So those are options that are rarely used, but could be used. Things like Amelanker, shadbush is a good alternative. Even our eastern red cedar, that it's common and people say, oh, I can't use that. You can use that. It's dense. It makes nice berries for the birds. It does make a lot of good caterpillars. It's perfect nesting site. and it's a good screen. It does all those things. And if it were from China, we'd love it. But because it's from here, we ignore it. But I understand the challenge. But planning something that is going to misbehave, and then, I can drive from New York City to Richmond, Virginia in the spring, and it is white all the way down from Bradford pear that has escaped. It's really a menace to our natural areas, and it's producing very, very few caterpillars. So that chickadee that needs 6,000 to 9,000 caterpillars cannot breed in a Bradford pear polluted area. So that's simply not the solution. We have to find other options.
Okay, thank you.
I mean, no plant is better than calorie pear because it won't escape.
All right. Let me see if we can try again here. Melissa Spear, did you have a question?
Hi, yes, thank you for a great presentation. My question is, I've been looking for people to help me develop a native landscape, to like do the work and also, to design it. But I've gotten a lot of, everyone I've spoken to from landscape teams doesn't know anything about native plants and is, kind of discouraging me. So how do I find people that can help me do it properly?
Well, hang in there until you do find somebody. This is largely an open niche right now. I've been calling for the education of ecological landscapers for some time now. If you're looking to start a new career, if you're young, you like plants, do it, because there's a lot of people like you, Melissa, who want to hire somebody who is knowledgeable and can just do it. Most people do not do any gardening themselves. They simply hire a lawn service. There is a very well and established group called Andropogon that does this in a big way, but it's usually bigger restorations. Does the Native Plant Society have suggestions for ecological landscapers? I'm hoping more and more people are going to put their shingles out. But you're right. If you just go to the yellow pages, most of the time they don't know what you're talking about.
Hi, it's Jessie speaking. The Native Plant Society doesn't have a list, but if Melissa sends an email to the Southeast chapter, I will respond with a recommendation of someone I know, and this is in Southern New Jersey, who does native plant design and installation. But Doug's right, they're very few and far between. One of the plugs I'll make, though, is for our meetings. We have 12 chapters throughout the state. And normally when we're meeting, people come early, they stay late, and we just talk about native plants. And it's such a good way to share, what's working, what isn't working. If you were to come to one of our meetings in the Southeast chapter, another chapter, and you brought a list of the plants you were considering or you're looking for ideas, you would be met with lots of good suggestions and a lot of feedback. So that might be one of the ways for people to be a little bit guided in what they can plant and what will work in your area.
Thank you.
Fabulous. Looks like there's a few suggestions on the chat as well. If you kind of scroll through that, I'll try and write them down as I go here.
Good.
And get that out to you as well. Yeah, good suggestions on there. So take a look through. They put the towns in there. That's great. Dylan O'Brien, are you available to ask your question?
Hi, yes, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So I am the guy earlier who mentioned I'm part of the watershed ambassador program right now. But my background, as I mentioned at UD, my undergrad was in agriculture and animal science. I actually double majored. I'm kind of new to the environmental sector, but a big area I'd like to hopefully get into once COVID settles and jobs are kind of more readily available would be something in the sustainable agriculture field. And I feel like all this information today is really important for that, for the future. So my kind of just a general question. Do you have any recommendations or advice for someone like me who's looking to go into that kind of interdisciplinary field that's kind of on the rise?
You know, I'm feeling kind of brain dead right now. I can't think of a thing. I guess I would need to know more specifically where you're headed. You know, how old are you? What you see yourself doing in 10 years. The easiest thing is to find somebody in your area and work with them until you've got the experience, as opposed to going out on your own. But you know, are you picking something where you need an advanced degree? I don't know. If you want to send me an email, we can chat about it. But
Sure, absolutely. Thank you.
okay, good.
All right, I think we'll do one or two more questions here. There's a Jean Dorham. Are you available to speak?
Doremus, hi. Doug, question about mulberries. We have a lot of mulberries, one very large one in an area that we would like to make into a pollinator garden. I kind of have mixed feelings about them. It's a male and several others around. They're kind of a hard tree to maintain. Give me some redeeming features that would make me feel a little bit better about them if you can.
It's a male, so it never has berries.
This big one, yes.
Yeah. Well, it's white mulberry. So it's an introduced species that has crossed with red mulberry, and through intergression, all the offspring turn out to be white mulberry. I have heard from people in the know that we can't find true red mulberry anymore, which is the native, until you get to Texas. On the other hand, of course, you know, the females make berries, and the birds love them. It doesn't support any insects, but red mulberry supports hardly any insects either. It's one of those natives that's just very low on the productivity list. So there's not a, you know, the berries are the big redeeming feature, and if you don't have any, then it's probably in the way of your pollinator garden.
Thank you. That's a terrific answer.
There's a good quote on our chat here that NIMBY has a new meaning. Not in my backyard should be natives in my backyard. So
Good.
Well, I think we've covered a lot tonight. We will try and gather as much information as we can and put that all into one big email with lots of links for everybody, and send that out. Doug, I really want to thank you for sharing your information with all of us tonight.
You're
Really
welcome.
appreciate it, spending your time and your knowledge there. So thank you so much.
All right. Thanks for the invitation. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Very good. All right, go forth
Good
and
night.
fly with native plants. Thank
Right.
you very much. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.